Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending tonight's conversation. My name is also Malik, and I'm the digital curator at the Stuart Hall Foundation. And I'm so pleased to welcome you all to the latest installment of the SHF's Reconstruction Work Program. Stuart Hall discussed Reconstruction as an opportunity to reinscribe the past, reactivate it, relocate it, and resignify it in order to work through the present, reinterpret the future, and to imagine something else. Our Reconstruction Work series implements Hall's thinking through a series of online conversations where we invite writers, artists, and activists to critically consider how we can build a better society in response to the COVID-19 crisis and the Black Lives Matter protests worldwide. Stuart Hall may not have tackled issues around climate change using the same language that has developed over the last 20 to 30 years, but it's interesting to think about some of the questions his scholarship helps us pose about its mediation. How is the climate crisis represented? On whose terms is the crisis communicated? On what and from where are the dominant narratives around climate change centered? And from which direction are dissenting voices interrupting dominant narratives? Hall gives us the conceptual tools necessary to locate the contradictions in discourses around climate change and to develop deeper and more inclusive understandings of the catastrophe facing us all. The Contextualizing Climate Crisis series has sought to provide a counter-narrative to dominant mediations of the crisis. It aims to complicate top-down approaches to circumventing climate change, championed by the political and business elite of the global north, to contextualize the crisis within a history of colonization, foreign policy, global economic disparities, and racialized injustices. The aim isn't to victimize those most impacted by the crisis. Rather, the series is designed to provide a people's history of climate change that centers the political agency of those most affected by it in order to highlight the long-standing traditions of communities and thinkers resisting climate antagonisms and colonization simultaneously. In today's event, the conclusion of our Contextualizing Climate Crisis series, Frontlines, Land and the Climate Crisis, we welcome three brilliant activists, Abeer Butmeh, Hamza Hamouchene, and Sam Siva. Abeer Butmeh is a water and environmental engineer. Currently, she is the coordinator of Pen Gonfo, Palestine. She is a leading woman activist in Palestine and an alliance of environmental justice organizations in Palestine. Abeer works closely with affected communities, the youth sector, and with local government councils in addressing the environmental problems faced by the Palestinian people. She has various skills in campaigning, coordination, communication, and facilitation between different bodies with more than 10 years experience in the area. She has strong skills in institutional development, monitoring and evaluation procedures, financial management, program and project management, and procurement procedures. She is a researcher in different environmental topics, mainly in water and climate change. She is a trainer in different environmental subjects, water, wastewater, and environmental issues. She is also an active member in many social and environmental networks at a local and international level. Dr. Hamza Hamouchene is a London-based Algerian researcher, activist, commentator, and founding member of Algeria Solidarity Campaign, Environmental Justice North Africa, and the North African Food Sovereignty Network. He is currently the North Africa Program Coordinator at the Transnational Institute. His work is focused on issues of extractivism, resources, land and food sovereignty, as well as climate, environmental, and trade justice in North Africa. He is the author, editor of two books, The Struggle of Energy Democracy in the Maghreb and The Coming Revolution to North Africa, The Struggle for Climate Justice. He also contributed book chapters to various books, including A Region in Revolt, mapping the recent uprisings in North Africa and West Asia, the Palgrave Encyclopedia of Imperialism and Anti-Imperialism, and the Voices of Liberation, Frantz Fanon. His other writings have appeared in Africa is a Country, The Guardian, Middle East Eye, Counterpunch, New Internationalist, Jadaliya, Open Democracy, Roar Magazine, Pampazuka Nawat, El Watan, and the Huffington Post. And Sam Siva is a writer, grower, and organizer with Land in Our Names and the Right to Roam campaign. They are passionate about liberation through healing, creativity, and collaboration. Today, Abeer, Hamza, and Sam will discuss the links between the climate crisis, land, and colonial extraction. This conversation asks how land is central to efforts to both deepen and circumvent the crisis. Live captions are available by clicking the CC button in the Zoom bar, and the audience Q&A will take place after the discussion. So please submit questions or comments using the Q&A box at any point during the event, and we will try to answer as many as we can at the end. So without further delay, I'd like to welcome Abeer, Hamza, and Sam to begin the conversation. Hi, Hamza. Hi, Sam.
Hello.
Oh, there you go.
Hi.
Abeer, are you with us?
Yes, hello.
Hi, Abeer. It's such a pleasure to have you all here. And I'm really, really excited to have this conversation with each of you. I think each of your works independently, respectively, have really been incredibly inspiring and incredibly thought-provoking. And I'd like to kind of start off the discussion by thinking about ways in which we contextualize the crisis. And I wanted to kind of jump right in and ask you all, you know, in terms of the climate crisis, I mean, is it possible to start thinking about the climate crisis without considering the legacies and continuations of the legacies and continuation of colonization? Sam, I wondered if you could kick us off.
Yeah, thank you so much. I guess my instant response is that no, it's not possible, and I feel like that's the issue with a lot of environmental and climate movements that are led by corporations or organizations that seem to think it's a apolitical thing, or that we shouldn't involve politics at all, or these things distract and divide the issue. The truth is that European colonialism radically changed the landscape of the home countries as well as the countries that they colonized. If I'm thinking about Britain in particular, the plantations in Jamaica or in other countries or colonized places where, you know, it was slave labor, it was like intensive agriculture that was incredibly extractive and depleted the soils after several years. And so it needed that constant expansion that we see replicated with green revolution technologies in the 20th century and continuing right now, I guess, as well. And also, if you think about it in an academic side as well, like how disciplines like anthropology to botany were shaped through colonialism, and if we're thinking about botany as well, so, and conservation and all of these things which see nature and see animals or plants as something that needs to be protected from humans, and then, you know, like it gatekeeps this knowledge and it isolates people from nature and like alienates people from being able to interact with it, while also downplaying the knowledge that indigenous peoples have about this ecology and about these animals or plants or whatever, as well as the fact that botanists such as Joseph Banks pretty much brought plants from other countries or islands to other parts of the empire to feed enslaved workers or for consumer items, from sugarcane to coffee to tobacco, and all of these like, you know, how it creates like this global food growing and plant growing network that is incredibly rooted with colonialism, but also how that has affected the climate to this day. So, and then again, another part of it, sorry if I'm going on as well.
But, no.
Yeah. Landowners, many of the landowners who were already aristocrats were, you know, solidified their wealth or made more money from investing in the East Indian trading companies or in plantations in the Caribbean. And then that just ended up fueling the industrial revolution, as well as the enclosures and pushing and displacing more people off the land. And this has just normalized a culture of like how we relate to our environment, how we relate to non-human beings. And, you know, it's even in countries that weren't a part of, I guess, European colonialism, that want to be wealthy, want to join the top GDP, like replicate these relationships of extraction, of exploitation, and it's just, you know, this is like all rooted in like in colonialism in my mind. So it's impossible to separate, and we've got to see that, and we've got to also recognize that a lot of the people who are living in formerly colonized or still colonized countries, whether it's in the Caribbean, whether it's in the Pacific, whether it's South Asia, they are at the front lines of like this climate crisis, and the situations that they're in, the political like dynamics of those countries, all of this has been affected and is still affected by the history of colonialism.
I think it's really interesting actually. Where it's such a large question, and I think you did pretty well to kind of to sum up some major points there. And I think it's a particular way of, I guess, organizing societies that was projected outwards at a particular point in time, and thinking about the ways that those I guess colonial relations with land and with people have buttressed, I guess, the way that we, you know, the conditions that we operate in today. So that's really interesting. Hamza, I wonder if you had anything to add to that.
First of all, hi everyone. Thanks for the invitation. I'm really happy to be with Sam and Abeer and sharing this important platform with them in an important discussion. I think Sam made excellent points. I just like to emphasize what they already said. After all, the climate crisis, and more broadly, the ecological crisis, are one result of the colonial conquests that have been unleashed since the invasion of the Americas in the 15th and 16th century. And this is a process that manifested itself, as we know, in sheer violence, resource plunder, slavery, exploitation, environmental destruction, and sheer violence, and racism as well. And this has been imbricated with the rise of the capitalist system. So in the 19th century, with the advance of fossil capitalism and its expansion globally through imperialism and colonialism, including in the 20th century, when the global capitalist regime shifted from coal to oil, we saw the intensification of the colonial scramble over fossil fuels and the extension of the colonial and imperialist domination to new lands, environments, landscapes, and communities. Now, colonialism, even if it formally ended, still continues in other forms and at various levels, including in the economic sphere. That's what some scholars and activists call neocolonialism or recolonization. So the underdevelopment that we see today in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, and in large parts of the global South is an integral part of the history of the world capitalism development through colonial enterprises. And we can, in a way, today see the extension of the same colonial relations of plunder and dispossession through the externalization and displacement of socio-environmental costs in the so-called green era or the renewable energies period. Basically, it seems that we're having the same system, but with a different source of energy, from fossil fuels to renewables, while all the political, economic, and social structures that generate the inequality, the impoverishment, the confiscation of resources and land remain intact. So just I want to say, like, if we are really serious about moving beyond fossil fuels, it is really important and crucial to closely examine these linkages between fossil fuels and the wider economy and address the power relations and global hierarchies in the international energy system.
Which is a fundamental point. And I wonder, Abeer, in your work with water specifically, I wonder if, you know, how some of the things that Sam and Hamza said, I wonder if anything comes up for you. Abeer, are you with us? No, maybe not. Okay. We can continue. I'm sure she'll be able to join soon. But but yeah, no, I think this is a fundamental. I think it's the point that you're both making is fundamental. I think there has been, when we try to kind of decipher the crisis, there is often this, this move to begin now, to take underdeveloped countries as simply underdeveloped just by the virtue of being underdeveloped, and then applying solutions based on the world as it currently is, without taking time to think about why the world is structured in the way that it is. Even with moves to green energy and Green New Deal, as you're saying, Hamza, what are the relationships then with the resources needed for green energy? Where are those resources going to come from? And I think more than it's assumed that the resource extraction, the same patterns of resource extraction that has been relied on by colonization for the last 400 years, those same channels will provide the resources needed for green energy to be a thing. So I think that these contradictions are fundamental, and it's something that I hope the conversation can move into a little more. And I think in terms of, for instance, I think Hamza, a lot of your work in Algeria, and I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about some of your experience organizing or speaking on situations in the Maghreb, for instance, and how this plays out, these taken for granted elements, and how neocolonialism plays out in how the climate crisis is experienced in areas in the global south.
That's a very good question, also. Just to say something about the countries of the Maghreb and generally North Africa, the Arab region in general, or even the African continent. The climate crisis, man-made climate crisis, is already a reality in those regions, and it is undermining the ecological and socio-economic basis of life in the region. Just a few months ago, over summer, my home country, Algeria, witnessed apocalyptic wildfires. Wildfires happen all the time, but this time it seems that they are becoming more severe year after year. That led to 90 fatalities. And it's not just wildfires, it's the drought that is impacting small-scale farmers, the food for producers, the peasants. It's also the floodings that are affecting, many communities around those areas. Some climate scientists are even predicting that huge parts of those regions would become, uninhabitable by 2050 due to rising temperatures, desertification, droughts, and that would lead to displacement of communities. So we have that reality, right? And this is a global phenomenon, but there are some countries, there are some communities, there are some people who are much more vulnerable to this. And it happens to be, a large part of the global south, racialized bodies, and women who are mostly vulnerable to these impacts. And on top of that, they're not responsible for that climate crisis. So we talked about colonialism at the start of this conversation. So now when we talk about climate justice, we need to think of ways of addressing this issue. It's clear now, and that discussions about climate crisis and the need to cut down emission is becoming mainstream. We are seeing it all the time in the BBC right now, and a lot of people, even decision makers, are talking about the need to cut down emissions, right? But then it seems we are reproducing that's why I was talking about the same patterns of dispossessions and colonialism, because you look at some projects of renewables, for example, in Morocco, you see the reproductions of land grabs. Communities, agro-pastoralist communities like in Ouarzazate and Midelt in southern Morocco are being dispossessed of the land they've been using for centuries, for pastures, because they are shepherds, they are agro-pastoralists. And suddenly these big, huge infrastructures come there without their approval, without their consent. They don't know about what's happening. They are not even offered jobs in those infrastructures. There is no local development. There is no building schools. So it seems to them that these renewable or so-called renewable projects are just the same story again. They are coming to dispossess us. They are coming to take away our land and natural resources. And this is just one aspect, because when we dig in to the story, we see that those projects are controlled by multinationals. They are in private hands. Private hands usually only think about, profits, short-term profits, without thinking about the environmental and social costs of such big projects. Some of those solar infrastructures, big solar projects in Morocco, are installed in semi-arid regions. And they are using a lot of water, to cool and clean the panels. So in arid and semi-arid regions, those projects seem to be nonsensical. So in the name of a green agenda, we are reproducing the same patterns. So what if we want a serious discussion about a just transition, we need to talk about who controls what, who owns what, for the benefits of whom. If we need to extract some resources for the need for this transition to renewable energy, if we need land for this renewable energy, who gets to decide, and at the expense of whom? And it seems a lot of these questions, are put under the carpet.
And I wonder, like this putting under the carpet, this, I wonder, Sam, if you had any thoughts. I mean, with COP26 not far behind us, this kind of aversion, I guess, to contextualize what you did so beautifully at the beginning of this conversation. So, why do you think that why do you think that there is this aversion to contextualize the crisis in this way?
I think the reason there's this aversion is because the same people who've had power continue to have power, and the more people who join their ranks are not really interested in justice. They're more interested, like, it's driven by a lot of personal interest. And maybe I'm just really I don't know, maybe it sounds really pessimistic, but 50% of the land in England is owned by 1% of the population. A third of that are aristocrats. So they've had land for centuries. The same people have the power. And if we think about who controls a lot of these companies, if you look at the conservatives and how many of them are landowners or landlords, how many of them have family members or friends who work with these lobbying groups or companies, I feel like nothing's surprising to me that, that's why I just feel like the same people who have interest in these companies, in this way of being, are the same people being in power. Even Elon Musk, I really don't like him, but his father owned a gemstone mine in South Africa. They're white South Africans, and he's doing green technologies, right? And he also was supporting the coup in Bolivia because that would mean he could access lithium. So even the people who are pushing green energy, supposedly, they're business people, they're capitalists. So they're no different to me. Green capitalism is no different from, as Hamza was saying, fossil fuels or colonial venturers or whatever.
It's interesting because that's also the way that the wealth has been accumulated by the people who by the people who are occupying those positions today. I mean, that is also can be contextualized within these kind of colonial relations. I think I wanted to ask about these how colonial extraction is taking place at such a rate. So I kind of this coup in Bolivia is one of the ways in which this happens, and I kind of wanted to take the conversation and think about ways of intersectionally kind of reading this crisis. Ways of thinking about the global South and the global North, and not as two disparate kind of locations, but thinking about how I suppose the climate crisis takes place in between these, places, how it moves. Yeah, Hamza, did you have any thoughts on that?
If I understood them correctly, your question also is you want me to talk a little bit about the intersections,
Yeah. So the intersections, and by that I mean kind of like, what is the transnational relationship between the global North and the global South in this instance? I think this the point that you made, Sam, about Elon Musk and helping organize the coup in Bolivia, and the wealth, also his the majority, the wealth that he began his kind of his company with, coming from the mines in South Africa, and this relationship between lands, and so clear in this instance. But there seems to be in I guess mainstream mediations of the crisis, the global South is treated as one region of the world and the global North is another. The global North is the leader, while the global South needs to get rid of coal. There are they're straggling behind in these ways. They're actually they're stopping us from reaching this point where we can have this supposed green revolution. So I wanted to, Hamza, in terms of kind of in your thoughts and your work, how do you see the global South and the global North relating with each other, not just in the past, but in the present?
I think this is a very good question. Obviously, I believe that the current economic and political system that we live under is differentiated into core parts of the world, the richest parts of the world that extract wealth, and the peripheries of the world. And I still believe that it remains largely geographical. That's why I still believe in the usage of the words global North and global South. But obviously we need to have more nuance in this as well. Because even in parts of the global South, there are some rich elites, some rich ruling and corrupt classes that are benefiting and that are complicit in the plunder and the pillage of resources, even for their nations. That's why we need to inject a kind of a class analysis into the analysis, and it's not just class; it's about class, race, and gender. For me, any talk about just energy transition need to grapple with the question of power. Like, in other words, as I said earlier, who controls and who benefits from society's use of these resources in relation to the energy, food, economic systems, and so on. And this means recognizing that the current system concentrates power and the benefits of resources use with relatively a few actors. That could be, rich ruling classes, that could be corporations, while externalizing, the socio-environmental costs to the majority, but with more impacts on those who are more marginalized, such as the working classes, women, and racialized bodies. And this also means recognizing that countries of global South are still systematically exploited by a colonial and imperialist economy built around the pillage of these resources. So yeah, we need to have some kind of nuance rather than just falling into a global North, global South dichotomy, because those dynamics of dispossessions are also happening in the global South from the global South ruling classes as well. They are part of that system as well.
I think that's a really, really important point, because I think even when we think about ideas around race, ideas around class, I think that sometimes it's the ways that race politics and climate justice, how those translate a little bit differently, when we're thinking about local instances, and when we're thinking about the West and we're thinking about the global South, because normally where the people selling off those resources in the global south are leaders who, you know, do in Western terms look like you know, so so I think this is where some nuance needs to be applied. Absolutely. Abeer, are you with us in Tirana?
Yes, yes.
Hi,
Yes, I'm here.
hi. So nice, so nice to hear your voice, and to have you with us. I wanted to. I'm unsure if how long have you been back in the conversation?
Yes, just I've disconnected for 1 minute only.
Oh, okay, great. Okay,
So,
great,
yeah.
great. I actually, you know, this entire, you know, this question about the global south and the global north, and your work with water, and kind of, I guess, how, you know, what is the relationship between people and water in your particular context?
Yes, in relation to water and environment and the climate, we cannot separate environment on the politics. It is linked together, especially in Palestine. When we talk about water, we talk about the sovereignty on water resources. And also when we talk about climate crisis, so we have to sever our natural resources in order to adapt with these crises. When we talk about the climate change and how to fighting against climate change, and how to make the large countries in order to be responsible on and to commit to do their responsibilities in order to mitigate and to decrease the greenhouse gas emissions. So it is an integrated system between the big countries and small countries. When we talk about water, which is the main important element in order to adapt with the climate change, the first thing we have, we need to have the right to sever and to confine nearly 85% of water. It is controlled by Israel. So when we talk about climate justice, we cannot talk about climate justice under occupation because colonialism system control the water resources that prevent Palestinians to adapt with climate change and decrease the climate change impacts on Palestinian people. So, and also other countries all over the world. So when we talk about climate justice, we have the right to control and to sever our natural resources in order to be able to develop and channels. You talked previously about green or clean energy. In order to make or in order to adapt with the climate change, we have to work all together at national level and also at international level. At national level, each country, even if it is small country, we can do small initiatives, transformative initiatives in order to be able to make a change in a system, in a policy, at a national strategy in order to make transformative large-scale initiatives at national level. And also at global level, we can collaborate together in order to lobby against colonialism and corporations that damage the natural resources and that work against a sustainable world.
And that, I mean, this is the thing I think that's coming up a lot, Hamza, is this idea of power. I think Sam, you mentioned this idea about land ownership in this country and how, you know, how those numbers are a large portion of, or the majority is owned by a ruling elite. And Hamza, you're talking about kind of the way that power, if we think about things through power, who owns the access to these resources, who owns the access to land, who owns access to land, who is able to buy and sell land, you know, all of these things. And Abeer, when you're talking about water and access to water, I mean, this all becomes then a question of power. And I think that that is a really useful lens to start thinking, not to start thinking, but to take the conversation a little bit further. And I think when we think about, you know, reparations, for instance, you know, I think, Abeer, I really like what you're saying about this kind of lobbying internationally and bringing people from different contexts together to I guess, to circumvent this power imbalance. But what, you know, and I asked this question because I know, Sam, that this is a big kind of a big point for Land in Our Names, and it's a really, really interesting point, I think, from the perspective of Black people operating within this country, or people of color operating within this country, and thinking about what reparations looks like to members of the diaspora. You know, what does that look like? And I think that's just a really interesting approach. So I wondered if, you know, is reparations a useful way about thinking about addressing this power imbalance, is my question.
I could say some things and then
yes, you do.
Okay,
Yeah.
So I feel like reparations is sort of the framework that Land in Our Names is operating through, where we operate with like a reparative justice framework to everything that we're doing. And we have a working definition where, you know, one of the things we do stress is that, yes, it's about resources like land and money, but it's also about repairs and healing. And I feel like within Britain, where it's not, at times, at least for me in London, I feel like, you know, I can be quite sheltered from the effects of the climate crisis. But obviously, if you're in a place that's getting a lot of floods and stuff like that, then I don't want to like say, oh yeah, you're not on the front lines or whatever. But I think, you know, it's quite easy to not notice it. And I think so much of it is like, for Black and people of color, a lot of Black and people of color in Britain live in urbanized spaces, and we don't feel entitled to access spaces. So like having the opportunity to heal and being able to go into green spaces, to be able to go into nature is such an essential part of it. And also to heal our spirituality, because I feel like for me, connecting to the land, being in the countryside, being in forests, being near the sea has really helped me heal my mental health, like mental health wise, but also to have a connection with like my ancestors, with different types of understandings of like a spiritual framework, I guess. But then, yeah, I do think redistributing land and money and resources, because of the fact that Britain has a very historic hierarchical system that is at the top. We have like the Queen and the royal family, and then we have all of these families and people who have historically through centuries held so much power in land. And the way that what distinguishes the poorest people from the wealthiest, or the people who can live most comfortably, is whether they can inherit land, is whether they can own a house, is whether their family was able to inherit some money from some relative that's passed away. And like that has completely skewed who is able to live freely and comfortably and those who aren't. And one thing living in London as well is constantly seeing like this displacement of people that seems to have just gotten a lot more intensified in the past few years. For me, or at least I've started to notice it more, is that you can't set down roots, you can't rest, you can't organize, you can't connect to the land that you're on, because you're constantly being moved. You don't have a community that is based in a geographical place, and so you just feel like powerless in a lot of ways. And that's the benefit, or that's the privilege of people who do have money or land or whatever. And so I think of reparations as giving the opportunity for people to actually recognize that this is not something that they earned through meritocracy. You know, this isn't something that your privilege, your power is not something that yeah, your great grandfather worked really hard or whatever. It's that we live in a fundamentally unjust society that has meant that people were like a few centuries ago or even less than that were able to gain so much money from exploitative, extractive industries that were, you know, and the fact that the slavery compensation scheme, so after emancipation, that massive loan that the British government took out to pay enslavers, basically, and that was paid off, that debt was paid off with taxpayer money. So we have, if we've been living here before and working until 2015, we would have been contributing towards paying off like families of enslavers, basically. And like a lot of those people who got that compensation money are the upper classes, are the middle classes, are well-known politicians, actors, whatever, are very much embedded within the institutions, British institutions. And so it's just, and Hamza talked about this, it's about class, and we have to have that analysis too. We have to see that it's not about buying into this, thinking that yes, we should participate, but it's about how do we redistribute these resources, but also organize around it. Like if we get given land, it's like, how can we do it in a collectively owned way? How can it involve community stakeholders? How can it be not just about having more Black and people of color become land and resource hoarders as well, but how can it create space for people to heal and to organize and to build together as well?
Hamza, I wonder if you had anything to add to that.
On the question of, I feel that I talked a lot. Maybe Abeer.
Yeah, of course. Abeer, are you?
If she wants.
Yes. When we talk about climate justice, all people should respect the all people rights. So as environmental organizations and as environmental activists, we fight toward environmental justice for all people in order to have the same rights, to live in a safe and sustainable environment, to have a sufficient and a sustainable resources to live in adequate environment, also to have the right to live without any violations against the land and against the natural resources. All people are equal and they have the right to use of course, taking into consideration to protect the natural resources, but they have the right to use these natural resources equally. Yeah, so the case of Palestine, we face the climate crisis, but when we talk about people in Palestine, it is different than other people all over the world because it is under occupation. So the power, which is the Israeli occupation, they control the resources, they control the land. They're denying the Palestinian right in their lands and in their natural resources, mainly water. So, for example, Palestinian people buy their own water from the Israeli occupation. And unfortunately, this power starts expansion all over the world in different countries. For example, the Israeli water company that manage water and wastewater sector in Palestine and in Israel, they start expansion in different countries in South Africa and also in Latin America, in eastern of Asia. So there are a lot of new cooperation between this company, and it promoted itself as a very professional company in managing water, and it is professional in water technology. And the fact, what happens on the ground, that Mikorot, which is the Israeli water company, practices the water apartheid in Palestinian land, steal the Palestinian water resources and denying the Palestinian water right. So I think the main principles to achieve climate justice all over the world is to respect people right all over the world in to live in a sustainable and safe environment, respecting their rights, and also the big countries, they should commit and do their responsibilities in order to decrease the emissions with real policies in order to make a change, not only slogans without implementing and a real implementation for the strategies. And so they have to walk what they talk. They have
Oh, Abeer? Oh, that's such a shame.
Increase their dependence on clean energy source and to decrease depending on the fossil fuel. But what happened on the ground, for example, one of these projects, there are two proposed projects between EU and Israel, which is supplying EU with gas, which is a fossil fuel source, in order to provide to supply EU with energy. So how EU support these two proposed projects while they are committed or to decrease or to increase their dependence on clean energy source. And this case can be applicable to all cases, all the governments and the main actors in the climate and the main responsible actors at the global level should implement their commitments on the ground, and they should fulfill their responsibilities to decrease their emissions and to do their responsibilities to the countries that is affected by the climate change, that were a main cause for the damages in other countries.
I mean, thank you, Abeer. And this point, I think, that keeps coming up, is this idea of transnational solidarity. I think what's really interesting about this conversation is that we have three varying contexts, all coming from speaking from different positions. And I want, thinking about what, or if it's possible for there to be a top-down approach to circumventing this crisis, or to addressing this power imbalance, land dispossession. I mean, is it possible? And this is a question for all of you. I mean, is it possible for there to be a top-down approach to circumventing this crisis?
Can I go, Ursad?
Of course. I mean, everyone should jump in whenever.
I don't like the words top-down. Definitely my answer would be no. I'm really happy that Abeer is with us to bring the question of Palestinian liberation struggle to the table. The multiplicity of experiences are always enriching. In that respect, for me, the fight for climate justice need to be both at the local and global level. What I mean is that local or localized discussions and experiences either in North Africa or in Palestine or in Latin America or in Europe can enrich the global discussions around the just transition, the needed just transition. But at the same time, we need to be conscious that our predicament is global and systemic. Therefore, the solutions we need to be also global and anti-systemic. So this global vision that we have, around climate justice or a just transition or an alternative economic system must be alive to the diversity of the different situations and the diverse forms that just transition can take. And we must also be, sensitive to the fact that the massive global and historical inequalities and their continuation in the present are part of what must be transformed to bring about, the just and sustainable society. This means that, just transition may mean very different things in different places. What might work in Europe must not necessarily be applicable in Africa. What might work in Egypt might not work in South Africa, and what might work in urban areas in Mali may not be good for rural areas in India. So we need to be, imaginative and have a decentralized approach with guidance for local populations themselves. And for me, at the heart, of this vision or emancipatory project are, two projects or two questions or two concepts. The concept of radical democracy, not the type of bourgeois democracy that we have here in the West, where people suffer in the lockdowns while their leaders are partying, in number 10. So it's a kind of democracy that need to take into account the question of popular sovereignty, involving the communities, involving the most vulnerable amongst us in the decision making. And some mentioned that is also about redistributing wealth. And the question of reparations comes into this. We need to redress and repair the current system, because most of the discussions that we have around the Green New Deal, for example, or the global energy transition, at least to me, this is my opinion, seem a bit Eurocentric or too focused on the global north. They are not global enough. They don't take the question of global power seriously, and they steer away from a proper analysis of imperialism. And we need to say it. If just for me, Green New Deal has to be global with huge investments from the north for it to work. And in here, the climate or the ecological debt must be paid. The most vulnerable countries and the most vulnerable communities. How do we do that is another question. But for me, this is a logical principle. You are the responsible for the climate crisis need to pay for it. Simple.
And perhaps it's the colonial legacy of what the global means, or the definitions for global is something that really needs to be addressed. Is how we think of the global and what does the global mean, and who, what are the ways the word, or not just the word, but what does the global carry? What colonial legacies this understanding of the global carry? I think that was really, really well put, Hamza. And before I ask the same question to everyone else, I just wanted to invite the audience to please, you've already asked some brilliant questions, but please put your questions in the Q&A box as we will move to answer them shortly. But yeah, I wanted to ask the same question to you, Abeer. Do you think this quote unquote top-down approach to circumventing the crisis, do you think that it's possible to circumvent the crisis from the top down?
Yes, we can do by unifying the efforts all over the world in order to put pressure on and fighting the colonialism and the colonial system. The most important thing, which is working at two levels. The first level at, I agree with Hamza when he talked about decentralization. to put the power or to give the power at grassroots level in order to take the decision of the solutions for their crisis. It is effective to let them or to give them the decision in order to solve the crisis that they have, and to put the power in front or in their hands in order to decide which the best alternatives for them, and also at national level, at the international level, we need to work together and to cooperate together in order to unify the efforts, to be stronger in order to make a wider impact on the violators and on the polluters that are the cause for the climate crisis and damaging in the environment. Another important point, which is the fair share of the responsibilities and the fair share of the solutions for the impact for the people who are impacted with the climate change.
I think, yeah, absolutely. I think the points around grassroots organizing, I think, is a fundamental one as well. And I think, Sam, I wonder if you can if you have anything to say to that.
I completely agree with everything that Hamza and Abeer have said. I was there like snapping my fingers. I was really energized. Yeah, I think the whole top down is very confusing, because if we're talking about global north led and that's a top down hierarchy, or are we talking about leaders? And like, I think it's just really hard to trust in especially in Britain, if I think about this context, trust in British leaders. But then I also think about things like Mia Mottley in Barbados, and like she's like one of the few politicians that I'm like, wow, you're doing great things, really making important changes. And it makes me think a lot about reparations, like Hamza brought up and Abeer has brought up in a way, is like, yeah, like a lot of these countries that people look towards, like these social democracies in Scandinavia, where did their money come from? How was it possible for them to have these policies? And you know, going back to your question about grassroots, like the role of grassroots groups, I think it's so important. Like, Land in Our Names is just one group, and I want there to be so many more groups looking to get land, looking to do climate justice in different ways, looking to critique ourselves, to build a movement, to build an interdependent network. I think we need it on the local, like Hamza was saying, but we also need the global. And I feel like that's also an issue within like I think sometimes with the agroecological movement or like climate movements here, it's like, oh, everything needs to be local. How dare you get like coconut oil or something like that? And I'm like, my ancestors were displaced, and I'm going to eat plantains because I need to. This is for my well-being. And I imagine a future where we are not disconnected and isolated from other countries just because they are far away, but we find ways to have sustainable and supportive relationships with different people across the globe. And we actually have real solidarity. And I think that's really important. Like, we need the global solidarity as well as building up like a local interdependent communities as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well said. I want to, I mean, again, this conversation, I feel I could go on for much longer. I have so many more questions to ask each of you. You know, ranging from issues around ecofascism to to kind of digging a little bit deeper on reparations. But I think what's great about these conversations is that they touch on specific nodes and give an alternative, I guess, way of thinking about certain things that are being spoken about in the mainstream, and hopefully people listening in on this conversation have benefited in some way. I certainly have. I know that. So thank you each of you for your contributions. And Abeer, I'm so sorry you had connectivity issues. But thank you so much for your insights, your critical insights. They've been a joy to listen to. So I'm gonna just take us on to the questions. And I don't know, I mean, also feel free to look at the Q&A box in case there's anything that you've seen that's interesting. I'm going to start off with this question, and feel free to jump in at any point. So I won't address it to anyone in particular. Abeer, because I can't see you, if you want to answer a question, just jump in and answer it, okay? Okay, this question. Is it true that green capitalism is no different from fossil fuel capitalism, as we said? Historically, the countries with lots of oil have generated great wealth from it. In some countries, whole populations have benefited from raised standards of living. In other countries, elites have hoarded the wealth. In Norway, there is a sovereign wealth fund. Is there an opportunity for North African countries and people from producing green energy from wind and sun, as well as a risk to livelihoods from pastoralism and so on? So I think the question here is, yeah, I think perhaps if we can start off with there's a lot there, so perhaps we can start off with the first question was, is it true that green capitalism is no different from fossil fuel capitalism?
Can I attempt to answer? Without going too much into the theory, what matters here when we talk about the climate crisis, and we need to say it clearly, the thing that led to climate crisis is the capitalist mode of production, is the capitalist mode of accumulation and appropriation and extraction. So for me, either it is fossil fuel capitalism or green capitalism, we are still in the logic of capitalism that dispossesses the majority of people in order to accumulate capital, what some people call rent or profits and so forth. So the argument that I was trying to make is, let's take the opportunity of this, I wouldn't say the opportunity, this juncture of the climate emergency that we have in order to change or radically or transform the system we live in. Because green capitalism, just for you to have an idea, is predicated on extraction as well. So for us to have electrical batteries and electrical cars, you need to continue extracting lithium. To build solar panels and wind turbines, you need rare metals and rare minerals, including cobalt and all other materials that I don't know. Where are you going to extract those? Most of those would be coming from countries in the global south. And two examples come to mind. You have DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, where a lot of extraction going on to supply the green global supply chains. And you have countries in Latin America, like Chile, like Bolivia, that would be also sites of extraction to feed that green capitalism. The other thing that we need also to be aware of is the false solutions that are being promoted right now as if they are the wonderful solution for the climate crisis. Things from net zero to carbon trading to conservation. So net zero and conservation projects, basically, they are saying each company or each country could continue emitting, continue polluting, while funding some reforestation and conservation projects in other parts of the world. And one statistic that was shocking to me last year is when Shell declared its net zero targets. So all the fossil companies, all the polluters, big polluters now, all the banks are becoming net zero as everybody is becoming green. But what is this based on? Shell needs the size, like 5 times the size of Netherlands to reach its targets net zero. What would this land come from? Definitely it's gonna become from countries in the global south to dispossess communities that use forests, that use that land for their own survival, for their own livelihoods. So we have all this, propaganda around green capitalism as if it's completely different. In reality, there is a lot of research happening, taking place right now. There is no green transition. There is only an expansion of some renewable projects. Most of the energy we have right now is coming from fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas, and it's going to continue to be like this in the next 30 to 40 years because there is an expansion of fossil fuel projects. Total is expanding in East Africa, other companies in Southern Africa, the same thing with my home country, Algeria. All the companies are continuing the extraction while saying we are net zeros. So we're gonna pay somebody to plant a tree in the global south, and then continuing the same extractive models, the same pillage, the same land grabbing. So this is what we need to be aware of. How do we change this? Is about transnational solidarity, is about building power, connecting the struggles to each other, and force our decision-making to change their minds. Glasgow COP26 has been a fiasco, total failure. Like the climate justice movement have been talking about for 30 years, scientists have been talking more than 30 years about the climate crisis, and till now, all they are proposing is false solutions. They are greening exploitation. They are greening colonialism. That's what they're doing.
Thank you, Hamza. Excellently put. Sam, did you have anything to add to that? No, okay, yeah.
I thought Hamza covered it completely. Okay, perfect.
And Abeer, did you have anything to say to Hamza? I mean, in relation to that question specifically, is it true that green capitalism is no different from fossil fuel capitalism?
Yes, exactly. I agree with what Hamza mentioned, and here is a very important point about the false solutions. That we have to be aware of it because yes, as a global direction, all the countries support these false solution, and actually, as Hamza mentioned, that COP26 and Glasgow, that was held in Glasgow, it was a failure, and also it was a chance for the polluters to continue their pollutions and to continue working at the same system and policy. So we are, we have to be aware about the global negotiations, and so we need to build the capacities of the environmental activists in order to be able to advocate their demands and what we need exactly in order to affect with global negotiations in order to achieve what we need and to work toward climate justice for all people. So yes, carbon trading and net zero, it is considered as a chance for the polluters to continue their operations and without any responsibilities and without any commitments. So yes, what we need is to cooperate all together, to work at global level as environmental activists, and in order to affect with negotiations and be aware of what these false solutions that cannot have any positive impact on the impacted people within the climate crisis.
Thank you, Abeer. And I'm conscious of time, so I apologize if I know some of these questions were not, most of these questions were not answered. But I did want to finish on one question, and if each of you could think about this and answer this in any way that you'd like. The question is, how does each of our speakers stay proactive and stay engaged in the face of the challenges each face in their advocacy and activism roles? And I actually wanted to kind of piggyback on that question and ask you about how you stay, what is the driver for you, what is that keeps you moving in the face of all the obstacles, in the face of all I suppose what seems like an incredibly mammoth mission. What keeps you going?
I could go quickly. Sorry, Abeer, is that okay? Yeah. Yeah. So I think for me, it's like learning and building connections with people and realizing it's not as impossible. It just reminding myself that change is going to happen and I just have to do this. And it's not therapy. Like activism is not a replacement for therapy or like going to heal you, but it's a possibility to connect with people, to build relationships, and to just keep learning. And one thing that came to mind is that learning about plants, learning about ecology, learning about how different systems work really nourishes me and reminds me this is something I care about and I want to exist in the future. I want to be able to live on this earth, and I want it to survive.
I like the optimism and the energy coming from Sam. It gives a little hope. Usually what I use, the Gramsci saying, pessimism of the intellect, given the destruction that we see and the fragmentation of our forces. That's the reality that we need to reckon with. Currently, we are incapable of exercising the change what we want, but at the same time, there is the optimism of the will. We don't have a choice. If we don't continue fighting and building and connecting our struggles, the ruling classes would take us to death and destruction. So if we can survive, if we can pass the torch to the next generation, and I feel there is also the responsibility for the next generations, right? I think they would blame us for a lot of what's happening. I think the minimum that we could do is try. Yeah.
And Abeer?
And for me, I think the main point is our belief in people's rights in a sustainable environment, and the grassroots levels right to live in a safe and clean environment. So our belief in their rights is giving us a power to continue fighting to achieve climate justice for all people, and also our responsibility for the future generation to live in an adequate place with sustainable resources and clean environment. Also, maybe what give us more power and to what make us keep fighting is the injustice all over the world. The injustice maybe create a power inside of us in order to fight the injustice systems all over the world, to give the right and to achieve the right and to advocate the rights for the grassroots communities and the poor communities, especially the most vulnerable communities, also the children who are the most vulnerable and who are unresponsible for the war and conflicts all over the world. So they have the right to live in a sufficient place with an adequate place and sustainable environment.
We'll have to bring the conversation to a close now, but I wanted, again, I could have had this conversation with you all for a very long time, and I just wanted to thank you all for bringing your expertise and your experiences and your critical perspectives to bear during this wonderful meeting of minds. And I wanted to thank everyone for the wonderful questions. And I'm so sorry that we didn't get a chance to really to answer all of them. But I hope that you found something in the incredible responses to the 2 questions that we asked. We will be sharing a recording of this event within the next 2 weeks or so. So do subscribe to our YouTube channel and be the first to be notified, to keep an eye on the, and also please keep an eye on our Explore section on the website, where we will have all of these conversations and all of the content as part of the Contextualizing Climate Crisis series on display and free to access. Also please make sure to sign up to our newsletter. We've got some really exciting events coming up, particularly the 5th annual Stuart Hall Public Conversation. There's been a lot of talk about solidarity and transnationalism. And our 5th annual conversation will take place on Stuart's birthday, so on February 3rd. And it's entitled Manufacturing Dissent, Moments of Solidarity. So it's on our website, so please register and come join us in what should be a really, really exciting and enriching conversation. And if you like this event, we are an incredibly small foundation, an incredibly small organization, and please help us make more of these events and make these events possible by donating whatever you can through our website. We are committed to keeping these events totally free, and also making sure that they have an afterlife online on our website. And we want to keep inviting brilliant minds like you see before you today to have discussions about the kinds of futures that we can create together. So yes, so thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of, what day is it today? Have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.